Welcome to the Leader Impact podcast. We are a community of leaders with a network in over 350 cities around the world dedicated to optimizing our personal, professional, and spiritual lives to have impact. This show is where we have a chance to listen and engage with leaders who are living this out. We love talking with leaders, so if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions to make the show even better, please let us know. Best way to stay connected in Canada is through our newsletter at leaderimpact.ca or on social media at LeaderImpact. And if you're listening from outside of Canada, check out our website at leaderimpact.com. I'm your host, Lisa Peters, and our guest today is Brad Petersen. Brad is an award-winning entrepreneur, angel investor, thought leader, and sought-after business coach. In 2008, he founded and scaled Canada's top toy company, Tech for Kids, and subsequently co-founded Pela, the $100 million sustainable phone case startup that created an entirely new category. In 2021, Brad and the team at Pela successfully launched a record-breaking $9.8 million crowdsourced funding campaign for the Lomi, the world's first smart waste kitchen composter. Brad has a passion for faith, fitness, adventure, and outdoor pursuits and lives in the mountains of British Columbia with his amazing wife, where they are building a beautiful life. Welcome to the podcast, Brad.
Thanks, Lisa. What a great introduction. It sounds like I should get you to do that for me every time. I'm blushing a little bit, actually.
Well, it took a lot to shorten it because there is so much more. And I feel like some of it, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to ask you about some of that stuff. But a great, you've had some trials and tribulations. I can say that. And I think they might come out here. But I just want to thank you for joining us today. So we will get started if you're ready.
I'm ready. Let's talk.
So in Leader Impact, we're obviously looking for a little bit of your professional journey and how you got to where you are today. So I'm wondering if you can give us a couple snapshots that were pivotal moments along that journey.
Yeah, look, my life is a series of happy accidents. I don't think, when I started out, that I ever thought that I would be doing what I am today. In fact, it'd be hard to imagine it. And I think it's part of what most people develop. It's called a narrative fallacy. We say we had perfect clarity about where we started and where we're going, when the reality is we can only connect the dots when looking backwards. So, I grew up in the prairies of Canada. Where I grew up, basically there's two things you do, which is agriculture or oil. Now, I did neither because I came from a family of chiropractors. My father was a chiropractor. His father and mother were chiropractors. And my great-grandfather was the very first chiropractor in Denmark. And Petersons were designed to be chiropractors. So I was on a path to do that. And through kind of a series of, again, happy accidents, I stumbled into the wonderful world of toys. And it started off as a toy distribution company. It was a bootstrapping business that I did for my basement in Red Deer, Alberta, which we were very proud of. That, our competitors were all based in Ontario and Toronto. And here we were, this little startup based in Alberta, that was actually showing them that we could build a really meaningful opportunity. And over time, we scaled that. And by the early 2000s, we built the largest toy distribution company in Canada. And, I was in my sort of late 20s and feeling really good about life. It seemed like I had the Midas touch. And that's when I came to learn that a little bit of ego can lead to a lot of overhead. And very quickly, my business went from being a hero to a zero, in that we went into special loans because we found out the hard way you can grow too fast. And when you break covenants to your bank, they don't like that. And they decide that they want to put you in the penalty box for that. And, special loans is like slow strangulation. They cut off your supply, your blood supply being the money, and you're they drip you just enough to kind of keep you alive, but not enough to actually thrive. So I ended up going through a restructuring, which is a fancy word for bankruptcy, to try and fix the business. 2 years later, after a failed attempt, we ultimately bankrupted that company, and I had to start all over again. And that became what I now call as my inconvenient blessing, because from sort of that, basement foundation of rock bottom, we were able to rebuild a better business that went from being a distribution company to a manufacturing company. And that business ultimately became infinitely more successful. And so we went down another path of building a toy company that did manufacturing. And fast forward to 2017, I exited that opportunity. And now I commit myself to sustainability and things that will leave a lasting impact, because, I spent a big part of my life putting smiles on kids' faces, but ultimately what I wanted to do in the next part of my life was to do things that would matter to generations that are yet to come. So that gives you a bit of a background.
Yeah. I was talking, I think, with a mutual friend, and he talked a little bit about you, for years, you built these plastic toys and you shipped them across, which is the sort of the reason for the, I now want to save, and the composting and the, is that true?
100%. Yeah. Look, again, during my career, so I co-founded a company called Basic Fun, and most people wouldn't know Basic Fun, but you'd know the brands that we made. We made things like Light Bright, Tonka, Connects, Care Bears, Mash'ems. And during that time, we've literally shipped billions of pieces of plastic around the planet. Again, putting smiles on kids' faces. But the consumer economy that we're a part of is this very much make, take, use, waste linear economy. And yet, if you think about it, history is made up of a loop economy. All waste in the past was something that was helpful for the next generation of things that we're going to grow. So I really want to contribute to how do we return back to that loop economy, and it comes down to making things out of better materials that have a graceful end of life, and providing the infrastructure to allow that to be possible. And that's my focus.
Wow, that is great. Thank you, Brad. All right. Well, the next one is a little bit about your principle of success. If you have a best principle of success and a story that you might have to illustrate that.
Yeah, look, I kind of go back to my opening story. I tell people, like, I don't have an MBA, but I have a PhD in DUMB from the School of Hard Knocks. I've learned a lot of my lessons just by doing it, going through it. And what I've discovered is that there is purpose. There can be purpose to your pain. On the other side of your struggles is more strength if you choose. And it just takes time and reflection to understand that. There's a famous quote that the world breaks all of us, and some of us are stronger in the broken places. And this is from Ernest Hemingway. And the idea being this is that broken bone, when it breaks, if you let it heal back properly, it's actually stronger than it was before. The alternate, of course, is that if you don't heal it properly, it becomes gangrenous and ultimately can lead to death. But I think, as I think about our human condition, there's a few things we need to ultimately be thriving humans. We need, food, water, sleep, shelter, companionship. And I would add to that, we need struggle. We literally need to go through difficult things to develop our character. It's a part of the human experience, and to deny that is denying a part of what we're really meant to be. So, I stories, I've got many, but going through bankruptcy was probably a pretty good one. I would even say that how I left the toy business. So I didn't talk about that. So in 2017, I had an exit, and people say, "Oh, you had an exit. That's amazing." And I say, "Yeah, it was amazing." In that I got fired from a company that I co-founded. And again, just kind of learned the hard way that when you get into business, you're choosing your partners, and you should inspect what you're expecting about the type of culture that they're leading. And so this partnership was based on financial outcomes and not on cultural impact. And so on paper, it looked perfect. Put the two companies together, the cultures are clashing. At the end of the day, there is no such thing as merger. There's only acquisition, because one culture is going to win. And I found out the hard way that my culture was not the winning culture, and I got exited. Now, fortunately for me, it was a sudden exit, but it had a soft landing, because at the end they bought out my shares, and that provided me new optionality. But, to be disrupted from, 27 years of blood, sweat, and tears, bootstrapping companies, going through bankruptcy, starting again, and getting to a place where suddenly you feel like you're built something of significance and now it's taken away. It was pretty disheartening. But again, as I let time and reflection take their place, I've now learned that the best gifts often come wrapped in ugly paper. Like, that was an ugly moment to go through, but it provided me the gift of freedom and the optionality to choose again, and ultimately to focus on something that I think is infinitely more important to be thinking about, which is how do we create waste innovation, and how do we create a more sustainable future?
Yeah. Um, Big risks can be big failures, right? Like, I mean, it sounds like you have done some really big things, and you could fail big too. Listening to you, I think of how fast and I think maybe this is a question. Things happen and the transition, because you have, I mean, do you sit in that pity for a bit and kind of go, oh, but your mind knows to get out of here. Like, there's the next, I don't know if you can, and you're a coach. So, I mean, someone's got to ask you that.
For sure. Yeah. Look, I think there is a reason there's 5 stages of grief, right? There has to be that initial anger and denial. It has to be there. Whatever happens, happens. And you have to let it land, because we're meant to be emotional and to feel things, and to deny that is denying part of who you are. But, Victor Frankel, he talked about that while we might not be able to choose what happens to us, we get to choose our response to it. We get to decide what it means. And, I didn't have to live through the horrors of a Nazi concentration camp, which he did. But I think if you give yourself the time, you get to decide if this is something that is providing you grief, or is it something that is going to be a gift. And it really is a decision, because within everything, there is a silver lining. There is that choice to, like, glass half full, glass half empty. And what happens to most people, including myself, you spend a lot of time in the victim zone, which come with the 4 Bs, where you're blind to your involvement of how you got to that place. You're begrudging others around you who seemingly are doing well, because you're comparing, and when you compare, you despair. You're blaming people for the circumstances that are in, and ultimately it's creating bitterness, which is an insidious poison that intoxicates only yourself, right? It's when you surrender to that past, you get to choose a new future, because endings, on the other side of endings, are new beginnings. And new beginnings are full of possibility, because we get to imagine a new and better future and use hope to drive potential and opportunity forward. And so, yeah, I mean, rejoice in your suffering. Romans 3, 5, and 6 talks about this, that we rejoice in our suffering, because suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance creates character. And on the other side of character, you've created new hope for a better future. And I firmly believe in that, in the way that rolls out.
Wow. I am glad I asked that question. That was great. Thank you. I think you're going to have a great one here. We're going to talk a little bit about our failures and mistakes. And I think we all know we learn more from our failures and mistakes than our own successes. So if you would share a greatest failure or mistake and what you learned from it.
Look, there's been so many failings, and I like to delineate between failing and being a failure. Okay. Because I think there are 2 different things. Failing is a part of succeeding. In other words, we come up with a thesis, we test it. They usually don't work, and hopefully we learn from it. We talk about failing fast, fail often, and fail cheap within an organization. Because if people aren't failing, that means they're not pushing themselves. They have to continue to push outside their comfort zone to find the edge of possibilities. Just if you make mistakes, just don't repeat them. Just learn from them and move on and make improvements. So they're iterations. I mean, if you take a look at SpaceX, which is, top of mind in terms of like how they got these rockets to eventually be recoverable. The first, I don't know how many tests failed. The things blew up. It didn't return back. They lost it. It cost hundreds of millions of dollars. But with every failing, they move closer to succeeding, where now today they have rockets that successfully deploy, I was going to say astronauts. Yes, they do astronauts as well, but satellites into the atmosphere and then return back. And it's an incredible innovation. But it took a lot of failing to get to that success. Becoming a failure is when you get knocked down and you choose to stay down. In other words, you surrender, you don't give up and go again. And so for me, I'm going to use bankruptcy. That's, that when that happened in 2006, that was, when you think about it as a founder, this is like your worst nightmare. You build a business, you birth it into the marketplace, and then you build it and scale it. And the unimaginable is, I don't ever want to go to that place. And I know that for me, that was my greatest fear. And then I was forced to go there. And it was super uncomfortable. But I can tell you, on the other side of that, I discovered something super valuable. I discovered that there's flanking maneuvers that can happen to your business if you're not aware of it. So the reason I call them flanking maneuvers is that in battle, most people think that these two armies come together and they clash it out and, the prevailing army wins. Typically what happens is there's a flanking maneuver. Another army gets in behind the other one, cuts off their supply or the reinforcements, and that's how they end up losing the battle. And if you go back in history, that's kind of the most famous way that battles have been fought and won. And in business, there are flanking maneuvers that can happen to you if you're not aware of it. And the three that I've identified are your people, your systems, and your capital. If you're growing and scaling a business, you are stressing the business. And in order for you to stay ahead of those stresses, you have to be constantly reinventing those. And if the faster you grow, the faster you have to reinvent those. And what I mean by that is that the team you start with is not the team you're going to finish with. So the people that got you to where you are may not be the same people who are going to get you to where you want to go. So you have to be constantly upgrading, either adding in new bodies or replacing the bodies that have their best by date is past due. They just can't get you to that next level. So it's really important that you're thinking that through. Second is your systems. You need to know you're inspecting what you're expecting and measuring the right things and making sure they're not vanity metrics. I tell people that this saying has so much truth to it. You should think about it all the time. Top line's vanity, bottom line sanity, and cash flow is reality. Are your systems telling you what you need to be monitoring, and are they giving you the right feedback so you can make the right decisions at the right time? And then finally, the third is cash. You need to have a continual supply of cash. People ask me all the time when they should stop a business. And I'm like, well, when you run out of cash or you run out of hope. And sometimes it's both. But you can avoid running out of cash just by getting ahead of it and thinking beyond that. And I would tell you to this day, having lived through special loans and having that sort of productive paranoia of knowing what that looked like, I'm always thinking about reinventing those three things. I'm constantly looking down the roadmap to say, where are we at, where are we going, and what are the resources on those three areas that we need to have in order to make that so. And so there's my example of how I used a failing to now be more formidable in my future ventures.
Yeah, I clearly need to change the question to failing, not failures. That was a great definition. Listening to you, there are so many lessons that I just actually want to stop and keep, I actually want to just write notes right now. So I'm gonna have to listen to this again. You are a business coach, a leadership coach, and I believe you have a book. And I want to jump in right there because I feel like, have you written all this down? These lessons, these.
Yeah, I can save you some time. I think the book, a book is a really deceptive thing, right? You look at a book on a shelf and you go, what is a book? But if you think about it, that 200 to 500 pages, however long it might be, is the opportunity to get into somebody's mind, learn about them, their character, and also the situations that formed them. Like what happened that gave them that unique point of view or that unique amount of wisdom. So it took me 3 years to write this book. And I would say that 3 years is distilling 50 years of my life into 3 years. That's now condensed into 250 pages of a book. And, most of my lessons came from things that were painful, that were difficult. So the book is Startup Santa, a toy maker's tale of 10 business lessons learned from timeless toys. And the thesis really starts from the fact that, we were created as playful. Humans are meant to be playful, and we don't stop playing because we grow old. We get old because we stop playing. And I'm a big believer that the way we were created was to be playful because it forces us to problem solve, be more curious, and to interact with others in a way that is going to create meaningful relationships. And so the book takes an iconic toy that talks a little bit of the history. So there's Etch-a-Sketch, there's Monopoly, there's G.I. Joes, just as an example of a few. Where did they come from? And then what are they teaching us? And then I tell a story about my experience in toy business, typically a tale of what not to do. I tell people this is not a to-do book, it's a what not to do book. So you're going to learn from the wisdom of my wounds. Yeah. And then unpacks the lessons that kind of co-join them together. And I think it's just a fun way to do that, to tell stories and to explain the lessons that came as a result of several failings on my journey.
Yeah. Well, we remember the lessons when we hear the story. It's the story that we remember and go, oh, yeah, there was a lesson in there.
100%.
Yeah. Well, so at Leader Impact, we want to grow personally, professionally, and spiritually for increasing impact. So would you be willing to share an example of how the spiritual makes a practical difference in your life as a leader?
Yeah, look, for me, it's being able to zoom in and zoom out. In life, you need both a telescope and a microscope. The telescope to zoom out and see the universe for what it is, and to feel small, and to feel it, that's an important part of who we are. We are, a speck on a speck in a very small galaxy, floating in a universe that seems to be infinitely expanding. And when you put it in that perspective, you get to a place of, wow, the things I'm going through at this point in my life are not that important. Yet the microscope has you zoom right through all that back to who you are, and know that there's only been one of you like you that ever will be in all of history. You are here, you're breathing air, you are creating energy, and you're here for a purpose. And so it's helpful to understand that you're not that important in the scheme of things, but that because you're unique, you're very important in the scheme of things. And that really helps me get grounded in my prayer and meditation, which is a part of my daily practice. For us to shine our light, we need to be plugged into the source of all life. And the only way you get there is by getting grounded through gratitude and connecting with the creator in a meaningful way. And what I would say is that I've spent a lot of time going through challenges, and it was during those challenges that there's a few mantras that I spoke often. And one was Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, which is trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will guide your paths. And I can remember just saying it over and over and over again, particularly when things seem to be somewhat hopeless, which is a tough place to be when you're in a place of despair and anxiety, and it creates a scarcity mindset. That's really, really awful. And that ability to say that really reinforced my thinking about that at the end of the day, only have a very small part that I have to control. Like Stephen Covey talks about, that there's your circle of control, there's your circle of concern, and there's your circle of influence. It's in the middle of all that. And your circle of control are the things you can control, which really there's only 4 things, which you say, think, ultimately feel. Your initial feeling will be felt, but ultimately what you choose to feel will be yours. And then what you do. That's it. Then there's, you use that to grow your circle of influence, but then there's God's circle, which is infinite. It's like, the planet spinning around at 16,000 miles an hour, going around the sun, and a universe that's expanding. I mean, the part I get to control and the part he has to control are very different, right? But it's very comforting to know that I have him in control of the bigger things. I get to control my part. I have to do my part. He's like when Moses went to the Red Sea, God had the hard work. He had to split the seas, but Moses still had to put up his arms. He was involved in co-creating. So for whatever reason I can't explain, our creator has designed a universe where we're co-creators with him. And knowing that is empowering. But understand that your part, however small it might be, is still important to actually making the eternal happen.
Mm-hmm. Did you always have such a strong faith? Have you always thought this? Or was this,
No.
I don't know.
No, I would actually say for a long time, I felt I had an imposter syndrome and inferiority complex. I would say this certain part of me still is there, particularly because I think growing up, I grew up in a home where money was considered bad, or at least too much money was considered bad. And since businesses are about money, business is bad. And if you really want to make the most of your life, you should be doing something in ministry. And so I actually thought for quite a long time that I was doing something kind of rebellious, and that was not not what I should be doing. And it took time and patience and coaching and reading. And I would say the book that made the greatest impact on my way of thinking was Every Good Endeavor by Tim Keller. And he unpacks that everybody's got a role as a part of God's kingdom on earth, and that work is sacred and it's eternal. And in fact, Erwin McManus talks about how our first job description comes from Genesis 28, where God says he blessed them. He said, be fruitful, increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. And that fill the earth and subdue it piece is really fascinating because if you go back to creation, the creation story, in the 6 days, the first 6 days, what's happening is God's taking chaos and turning it to order. And then the other 3 days, God's taking the order he's created and filling it with creation. And then right after that, he creates us and says, here's your job description, fill the earth and subdue it. In other words, subdue it, take chaos, turn it to order, fill it. The earth was already pretty full. He made a lot of stuff. It was very diverse, but he wanted us to continue to become co-creators. And so when I understood that my role as a human is to be creative and to create creation that builds more value into people and the planet, and by doing that, it's an act of service and love and has eternal consequence, that was super empowering. So yeah, I would say it is a evolution. It has not happened over time.
Yeah. Oh, great answer. Thank you. Leader Impact is dedicated to leaders having a lasting impact. So as you continue to move through your own journey, amazing as it is, have you considered what you want your faith legacy to be when you leave this world?
Kind of just following on what I just said. I mean, look, I'm inspired by the story of John Newton. For those that don't know, John Newton was a slave trader who felt remorse over his fact he was a slave trader. In fact, irony is he actually was a slave. He was a redeemed slave, but then became a slave trader, felt bad about it. But it was still business. And he was caught in a storm off the coast of Ireland. And at that time, he got on his knees and he prayed to God. He said, hey, if you save me from this, I promise to turn my life around. And God saved him. He went back to London, and true to his word, he started a movement and teamed up with William Wilberforce and became the sort of forces that abolished the slave trade in the British Empire. And people may not know that story, but they'll never forget the lyrics of his most famous work, which is the hymn Amazing Grace. And so when you hear that hymn and hear him talk about being saved a wretch like me, you can actually feel viscerally the deep conviction he had about, I had a wretched life. I was doing things that were not in integrity with who I was and what I really understood to be true. And so as I think about applying that story to my story, I shipped a lot of plastic around the planet, again, putting smiles on kids' faces. And it was definitely a noble endeavor, but I also felt convicted that it just wasn't a sustainable practice. And it's not just a toys, it's anything to do with consumer goods, where it's basically push out as much stuff as you want and the end of life is forgotten. So I feel that this opportunity for me to create redemption and to redeem waste into something of value, and making sure the end of life of products actually has this full 360 benefit that builds value for people and the planet, is really a legacy that I'm excited about, because I think it's something that can affect positively generations that I'll never see.
Yeah. I think of when I think of someone's legacy, I think of your book. How do you feel your book plays a part in your legacy?
Yeah, look, I think it does. I think, by the way, I think everybody has a story to write. Everybody should take the time to write it out, whether it's in a book or a journal or memoir. I just think it's, number one, you will be the greatest benefactor of the learnings, because we don't learn from what happens. We learn from reflecting and unpacking the lessons. So I learned a ton about myself through that process. But beyond that, I mean, I have pictures of my great-grandfather, who was the first chiropractor in Denmark. I see his face, but I have no idea who he was. And I wish I did. I wish there was an opportunity for me to get inside of his head and understand what he was thinking and what he did. Because, he traveled from Denmark to North America to become a chiropractor when a profession was not even a legitimate profession at the time. There was no internet. It wasn't like he could go ahead and Google and do a search to see what the local, restaurants and hotels were like in the area. I mean, it was blind faith to take that step. And so I think my hope is that this book is for my kids and my kids' kids an opportunity to know who their ancestry was, and that I did make the best of my life, and I did put the time and the effort in to continue to become the best and brightest version of myself. And I want to inspire them through that to be able to do the same.
That's great. Thank you. And my last question is, what brings you the greatest joy?
Look, I think this is an interesting one. Joy is actually comes from the word enjoyment, right? Like it's something that when we enjoy something, we get joy from it. All right. And I actually think it's important to delineate joy from happiness. Everybody's talking about, I want to be happy. And happiness to me comes from the idea of happenstance. It's something that happens in the moment. So like a bottle of wine, an ice cream cone, a new pair of shoes create happiness. But true joy comes from living a life of alignment with what you believe, what you value, and how you act on those values and virtues and convictions. So what I really love to do is I love to invest into building things that create meaningful and magical memories with other people, because I really believe that you are most enjoying your life when you're growing and you're giving. And so one of the things that I do here in British Columbia is I host events for founders, entrepreneurs, where we get together and we go mountain biking, or we go skiing, or we do timber sledding, a number of different outdoor pursuits that I love. And I love building these events, hosting people, creating surprise and delight moments within that. But most importantly, building in a way that we're going to create a meaningful memory. Because at the end of the day, the memories that we create with other humans that truly connect emotionally to each other are what is going to matter the most when we're laying on our deathbeds. That's my true belief, that we really invested our time and our attention to give people and care for people in a way that created something that was truly magical together. And so it's friends, family, and those that you want to surround in your circle of influence. I'm just a big believer that's where we should really lean in.
Yeah, lean in. Brad, I want to thank you for spending the last half hour with us. I'm going to listen to this again and start writing notes. You had some really some great answers, and I just appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a busy guy. Thank you so much.
Lisa, it's been my honor, and I look forward to getting to know you better and figuring out ways how we can maybe make some magic memories together.
I'll be following up. So if anyone wants to engage with you, like myself, I know how to find you, but how can people look you up, find you, engage with you?
Yeah, first thing I'd say, you can go to my website, which is bradpetersen.com, and you spell Peterson, however you want to say it, with D's and E's. I get called all kinds of things, but it's fine. And you can learn more about me there. You can go to my book website, which is startupsantabook.com. And you can actually download the first chapter for free. And there's some videos and resources that I think your listeners would find helpful. And then if you're interested in the companies that I'm working on, it's Lomi.com, Lomi.com. And from there'll be links to other things that we're working on as well.
Sounds good. And I'm sure by the time this launches, there might be something else. Who knows? All right. Well, thank you. Thank you again, Brad. It was wonderful to meet you.
You as well.
All right. Well, if you're part of LeaderImpact, you can always discuss or share this podcast with your group. And if you are not yet part of a LeaderImpact and would like to find out more and grow your leadership, find our podcast page on our website at leaderimpact.ca and check out our free leadership assessment. You will also find on our webpage Chapter 1 of Braden Douglas's book, Becoming a Leader of Impact. You can also check out groups available in Canada at leaderimpact.ca, or if you're listening from anywhere else in the world, check out leaderimpact.com or get in touch with us by email, info@leaderimpact.ca, and we will connect you. And if you like this podcast, please leave us a comment, give us a rating or a review. This will help other global leaders find our podcast. Thank you for engaging with us, and remember, impact starts with you.